Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 355 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we are going to work on getting ready for gold science. Enjoy! But before we continue, this is Marsh from the future here, that I somehow managed to delete 2 hours of game recording. OBS recorded it, it's in the logs, but I misplaced the video file. Luckily, I do make regular saves between every video, so I kind of have an idea of what was done. So the easiest thing to do here is probably just to do a little recap of what happened in that missing recording, and then we can get back to normal gameplay. Well, in the meantime, the accumulators have continued to be expanded. We have a lot of them now. Just out of curiosity. Is this gonna like break the computer? Kind of. Well, we have 77,000 accumulators for a total of 1.5 terajoules. And we're still building more. The good news is that it has helped with our salt. We are grinding through it. Certainly a lot of this is still very full, but the drones are bringing the salt in. So clearly making batteries helps out greatly with the salt. And we can fly over here to check up on our plutonium. That we actually have 11k of it now. So we have built up 1,000 of it just in the process of burning it and processing it. And we are making our way through all of this 238 here. That essentially we're going to keep burning plutonium until we have gotten rid of our extra 238, and then once this warehouse is empty, this is going to equalize, where we kind of burn both plutonium and uranium more or less at the same time. Where plutonium can only be made if we have extra 238, and 238 comes from burning uranium. But right now, since we have extra uranium, we're still going to be burning it in that way. But it's been working out pretty well. Got 20 curiums now. So this whole setup has been pretty good. Certainly having more accumulators has greatly helped out in smoothing out the power production of plutonium. And I also wanted to talk about a mod that I installed. And it's called Run Speed Toggle. Have you had the problem where the engineer runs too fast and you can't make him go slow? Or let's say he runs too slow and you want to make him go fast? Well, you can use the Run Speed Toggle mod here, which basically gives you 3 different speeds, and I just have it set to F6. I'm not sure if that's the default key, but you can just toggle between 3 speeds, where 0 is the slow, then greater than for the medium, and then double greater than for the fastest. Clearly this was intended for you to go faster, but I want to use it to go slower. So 0 is your normal walking speed, which I made the fastest, and then negative 50%, and then negative 75% for the other 2 speeds. And why would you want to do this? Well, it depends on the mods that you're using and your character's current speed. So right now, our character is running on refined concrete, and there's the quality of life upgrades to make it so he moves pretty fast. If you had exoskeletons, you could just toggle those on and off, but you can't really toggle the run speed of just how fast you go left or right. And this can be an issue if you need to place your character in a very specific spot. And you would want to do that if you wanted to pick up some items off of a belt here. So we can just put a few. Maybe pick some that are different colors. So what happens if you just wanted to pick up, say, the Nitnol? Well, you have to, like, very carefully get in there. And that could be kind of annoying. Just depends on how fast you move and how good you are at tapping the keys. It's just annoying. So with Run Speed Toggle, you can set between the 3 speeds, where 0 is the slowest, that's the medium, and this is the fastest. So this is just normal speed. But if I hit F6 here, now we're running at 25% speed. Now, you would normally want to do this, but let's say you wanted to pick something up off of the side of a belt. It's super easy, and then you can just set it back to normal walk speed. So that's a cool little mod that I added in, that it has very niche uses, but when you need it, it's very convenient. It's mostly relevant when walking on upgraded tiles, especially if those tiles have very fast run speeds. Otherwise, the factory is being pretty smooth here, not much to complain about. So now that we've gotten all of the supporting components ready, it's time to dive into gold science. And the last piece of research that we haven't done for gold science is low density structure. Of course, we need it for rockets, but it's also required for the science. And it's just a very expensive item. 20 aluminum plates, 2 titaniums, and 5 plastics. So it's a good thing that we upgraded our plastics production, because if we hadn't up until this point, it would not have lasted through low density structure. So we hit that, and now we have some of the other last things that we could have gotten, but let's just go straight into gold science. That we're going to need our tier 4 of lab. It's slightly faster than the previous tiers, and the previous tiers go into it. And we have a new component here, virtual particle injector, which requires a lot of random stuff that we have. That tungsten powder and polished rubies are new additions to our science bus. And then you need these components to actually build the lab. Construction core requires a centrifuge and all that low density structure. And this component requires that virtual particle injector and blue boards. And one thing I wanted to touch on here is kind of the difference or similarities between this and Vanilla Factorio. So I imagine many people are watching this have played Vanilla Factorio, and if you remember, that kind of the whole point of Science Cost Tweaker is that instead of requiring random belts and inserters and whatever that go into the science packs, instead they require all of these random items, and they feel more sciencey. Well, the vanilla game's reason for requiring, let's say, belts and inserters into science packs is because they're trying to nudge you along into automation. So if you've never played like a factory game or an automation game before, if you need something like belts, you'll be like, oh, I'll just handcraft a few. And you can do that, but that's kind of not the point of the game. And the longer you go doing that, the more you're going to be held back by your handcrafting. So the reason why the Vanilla Factorio requires those random items to go in the science packs is because they're basically saying, if you haven't automated this yet, well, you have to now. And this actually still applies to Science Cost Tweaker too. Not so much for the actual science packs, but if we go back to the lab here, they are kind of nudging you along. So to actually build the lab, we need those centrifuges, low density structure, blue circuits, and some other random stuff, but those 3 are the big ones. So they're basically saying, if you haven't automated centrifuges by this point, well, you have to. And that's also interesting in that they're basically telling you, if you don't have uranium power, you really should. And they're kind of helping you get to that point. And the same with the low density structure. They're saying if you haven't made any low density structure yet, you really should, because you're going to need a lot of it soon. And I knew this was coming. Of course, rockets require that, and that's basically where they're going with this. And the same with blue circuits. Like, you haven't really needed blue circuits up until this point, but you're gonna for the rockets. So I thought that's kind of cool, how the Science Cost Tweaker kind of mirrors Vanilla Factorio in that sense, but they do it with the labs, not with the science packs. So I guess we'll hit that and research it. But let's check out the previous tiers of labs. So the tier 3 of lab just requires all of its random components, but if you look at what goes into it, the big thing here, that's kind of random, 5 large solar panels. Why in the world would you need those for this lab? Well, you don't. But they're basically telling you, if you haven't done solar power yet, you really should. And tier 2 kind of accomplishes that with splitters and filter inserters. So in other words, just yellow tier of logistics, that if you haven't automated those yet, you should. And all the way back at tier 1 just requires a little bit of random low tier junk, but specifically, let's say the gray tier of transport belts. That's the 7.5 items a second belt that they're basically saying you should automate those. So that's neat. But now that we'll have the lab, we can make the gold science. And this is the last science pack that we need to make, short of space science, but we don't make space science, we acquire it. So following it down the chain here, to make a thermal energy store, we need lots of tungsten and lots of cobalt. to make one of them. This is very expensive. And we'll get some waste byproduct. And then we need to heat that thermal energy store, and that is done in any furnace. So we'll just use an electric furnace. We need to make a capacitor bank, which more silicon nitride, and our second tier of batteries. Then the heat-driven mechanical random number analyzer. Lots of titanium and tungsten with that heated energy store. And then we also need a virtual particle injector, but we add all those together and we will get our science. But we get 2 of them instead of 1. So I guess it's not quite as expensive as it looks because we're getting 2 science packs out of that. So we need that, and of course it will unlock all this other stuff, but we'll worry about that later when we actually have the gold science. But for now, we can kind of walk it back and take care of some of this other random stuff. Like now that we have low density structure, we can do the final tier of crawler robots. Not that we ever really needed those, but we'll just hit it. And same with the cargo bots. And if I haven't covered it in detail, basically the crawler robots are very slow robots that essentially carry multiple stacks of resources instead of multiple items. But they're obnoxiously slow. I just never bothered using them. And the other thing we could work on is Spidertrons. Or I guess in this case, the walking vehicle. Because we have multiple tiers of Spidertrons. And I guess this isn't really a spider because it only has 6 legs. It is the Antron. It's just a low tier Spidertron. And it requires all of these mech parts. So like mech leg segment, mech knee, mech foot, mech hip, mech leg, the frame, and the brain. All kind of expensive stuff. This is probably one of the few things that you would actually need rubber for because it goes into the feet. I probably won't be building any of these, but let's just complete the research because we have the time for it. And then the Tankotron, which is another 6-legged version, but it is stronger and better at fighting and has things like mech armor plates and the cannons. Again, probably won't use it, but we'll hit it in there and we'll have to wait for this last one here. But now we're actually getting into the 8-legged versions, the Logitron. It has an even larger equipment grid, but specifically it has 160 inventory spaces instead of just 80. So it's a lot bigger and more capable of logistics. And we'll have to wait for the research to complete and all of that. But that basically completes what I wanted to talk about with the old save. So let's load one that's a little newer. Okay, we're back again. And you see there's a fresh construction that happened here. Lots of trees were torn down. Built a new train station because we're getting ready for the low density structure. And it seemed like doing that on the intermediates bus made a lot of sense just because that's where the plastic is basically going in the factory. So that required a ton of extra space and landfill and whatnot. And accumulators continue to expand. We have even more of them now. We are up to 1.7 terajoules. And we're still grinding through salt. We kind of perpetually have a lot of it, but it's disappearing into these batteries. And we got some robots doing stuff. So let's fly over and cover some of these builds that were done in the lost recording. And one thing I decided on was making some of these biologically active tiles here, which you can see have already been placed. They kind of have a noisy walking sound to them, at least compared to not walking on them, but we're placing a whole bunch of them. So biologically active tiles are interesting. You put in kind of a bunch of random stuff. You need the alien plant life samples, glass, concrete, and soil, and all 4 of those are made at different parts of the factory, so it's kind of annoying to build. But you get 5 to 10 tiles out of that, and they have an extremely small amount of pollution absorption. But critically, it's not 0, which right now our concrete is 0. And the walking speed is slightly less than if it was refined concrete, which would be 150%. And the reason why I wasn't really thinking about these is just because I wanted the maximum walking speed. But we've been flying with the jetpack for many episodes now, so the actual walking speed on the ground isn't really that important. So as a result, making a bunch of these tiles and placing them all over the place kind of makes a lot of sense. So as far as where to put this build, well, I just put it next to the plant life samples that are being generated here. and just brought in the rest of the junk. We were already bringing in some amount of soil for these setups, but we needed to bring in bricks and glass, so that was a little annoying. But they're here now, and we're making a bunch of these tiles. And the annoying thing about these tiles is that they're kind of hard to see. And I've definitely been placing a lot of these between the recordings. But basically, between any builds where there's empty space that doesn't have any machines, I figured, hey, let's just put these down to try to absorb a little bit of pollution in the vast spaces between the builds here. And you can kind of see them. It's hard to see them when you just put ghosts down, because it doesn't change the color, but once they're actually placed, you can see how it's kind of like a really grayish blue, which is different than just the gray. Like, you can kind of see that border there. So I kind of wish the biologically active tiles were a little more obvious, but that's what we have to work with here. And as far as pollution goes, well, since we've been making so many batteries, our pollution is terrible right now. You can't really tell the difference with those tiles because they're not really there to absorb significant amounts of pollution. They're basically just there to stop mild clouds from extending beyond your base. But they're never going to stop this. But they might, however, kind of hold it back when it's just this little bit right here. So this stuff is built quite slowly because it's limited on how fast we can make these biological samples. So it just takes however long it takes. So we can check pollution here to see if these tiles are even helping. And it's kind of hard to tell because the tiles just get thrown in with everything else. But you can kind of see a bit of a trend where if you look at 50 hours ago, it was essentially trees that did the most work and then tiles were second. But then 10 hours ago, now the tiles are starting to be the thing that is doing the most work. Of course, trees are helping too, but they're a mild help. You're not going to be doing anything mind-blowing with those tiles, but I figured, you know, pollution is an ongoing issue with the factory, so we should try to mitigate it whenever we can without making major sacrifices to the factory. And placing a bunch of these tiles down in random places that don't matter seemed like a decent thing to do. One other thing to cover here is that research had completed on our agricultural modules. So I just updated our setup here. Instead of making module 5s to make module 8s. And the combined modules, like the agricultural modules, are interesting in the sense where they're not made out of the previous modules. You're basically just soldering two modules together, like an efficiency and a productivity, to make it. So it's actually quite easy to make them. That's kind of why I have most of the combined modules disabled in the mod settings, is because they're just so easy to make. You just combine modules and you basically get more module slots in your machine. So all that it takes to make this is alien plant life sample, solder, and then those efficiency and productivity module 8s. And then out the back, we get agricultural module 8s, which is plus 60% productivity and plus 60% pollution, which is pollution consumed, because these only go into farms, with no energy increase and no speed decrease. So they're pretty good. So basically anything that's a farm should basically get one of these, if at all possible. But that was pretty straightforward to make there. And the last thing that I was working on in the missing recording is our low density structure build. This is it. And it looks like we have it saved up, where it's 420 assembling machines with a massive 20 choppers for aluminum and just 2 for titanium. And all of these have a pollution cleaning module thrown in there. And of course these are all module 8s now, so they're all pretty powerful. We're adding all that together. It has its 20% crafting speed, but 160% of productivity. So how this works is the aluminum and titanium coils come in on this belt here. They are picked up by the 4 machines, 3 for aluminum, 1 for titanium. They are chopped and then placed on this output belt here which just goes down all the way. And then we throw some of the plastic on the output belt here, which gets pulled in, and then only one side of this gets the output of the low-density structure. And it was done in this way just to make this as small as possible and just use the least amount of space, because it's pretty huge. I would say this is probably one of the biggest builds that we've ever done in the factory. In fact, I don't know anything that has 500 machines in it. Well, this one was pretty big. But as far as the number of machines, it's only 368. It's just that the fish tanks are a lot bigger. So this is a very dense setup, and all of this is simply to make 30 structure a second. Because 30 a second is just kind of the random number that this factory has been using for whenever an output needed to be decided, but it wasn't known what the output should be. It was just decided to be 30. When they make it to the bottom, there's a splitter here to make sure only the structure continues on its way, and it gets sent back up. And these numbers are pretty crazy. Making 30 a second actually fits pretty well with the size of our belts, because we're going to need 230 aluminum plates a second for this. And that comes out of 22 aluminum sheet coils. And our setup right here can essentially do 60 a second. So this is going to require a third of our factory's output of aluminum just for this. And basically all of the plastic, all 60 a second, is going to have to be dumped into this. So this is about as big as it could effectively be, and have our factory still support it. And all of the research has been completing in the meantime. Now we're just working on the Logitron, and then we'll be caught up on research. So after talking about this, we have covered all of the things that are in the missing recording. So from here on out, future Marsh is going to have to leave, and now you're going to get past Marsh again as a part of your regularly scheduled Factorio video. Okay, looks like we've got this road mostly moved over. Also, kind of hard to see there, but most of our tiles have been placed. Also, most of the accumulators, just this little bit here at the end, and the tracks will run straight through it just fine. Definitely now, the plutonium reactors cannot get this filled up all the way. But that's by logic, not by lack of power. And wow, it's nice that it's 69%, but it's bad that it's already orange. There's 5 hours left on that oil well, because of all the plastic we need. Alright, looks like robots have basically finished this build for us. So now we need to cut it out and put it in here. How about right there? Seems good. We can help a little bit until our resources run out. And they're gone. That was a nice little test of our robots. And here they come. Let's see, this is intermediates unload 2. So negative 512 of aluminum and negative 512 of titanium. And now we have to wait for a second for LTN to make that request. And our buses have been quite busy keeping up with all of these batteries. And circuits too, surprisingly. See, why is this going so slow? Ah, they have productivity modules. They probably shouldn't. I mean, it's working up until now, but that setup was designed with speed modules in mind. Well, it made a plastic bar request. Not for our other items, but I don't think I actually turned the station on. So that might be the reason for that. Well, let's see if we can get this balanced out to where this provides 540 a second. So all of these need to consume it. It's not like silicon is that difficult to make. Well, that definitely does it on its own, just those few modules. So can we get away with the productivity now? Pretty much. It's not exactly matching this, but the output is actually higher, with 100 on each side, which is more than enough. But they make a huge amount of pollution. So how about just the efficiency modules? Because pollution is an increasing problem. the factory. We're holding it. I mean, it's not like the factory's about to collapse because of pollution. We just need to keep pollution in mind here to make sure we're not getting overpowered by it. And we're still holding 56% biter evolution. We are holding the biters at bay, so it's not too big a deal yet. Uh-oh, no power. That's not good. There we go. So yeah, gotta turn this on to actually get the requests in. And actually, should we place it this close? Now that I think about it, because what if we want to deliver more resources? Because this on its own is actually going to fill up the bus. And there's no reason why we couldn't put some more lines in here. We just put it down, and that's kind of annoying, but let's double the amount of space we have on this bus, just in case we want to put other stuff. Because the worst thing in the world is to have a bus that runs out of lanes. And there's a request for our new items, but unfortunately it means that all of this has to move down by a few squares. So down to, somewhere like right there. Yeah, it's making more requests because it wants more than one train worth in here, but we only have one station each, so it's just gonna have to wait. And at some point we'll upgrade these inserters, but these trains don't really run enough, as busy as they are, for that to matter. But I'm sure when we get max tier inserters, I'll come through here eventually and upgrade things. It's just, why go through the effort of upgrading all the inserters just to have to do it again when we get better ones? And that seems like everything we'll need. Okay, well, let's hook up the coils first and make sure this part works. It doesn't because I put it on the wrong side. That coils need to be over here. And for now, let's do an output priority on the left here, just so we get all of the plastic on this setup, so we'll be able to test it. But here we go. Try number 2, this time putting the coils on the correct side. Yeah, so far so good. And now it's got a huge buffer that it has to fill up. And looks like the inserter settings were wrong. But this has to be near side. Okay, I think that gets it all cleared out. Now everything is on the correct side of the belt. And while we're here, we might as well get this belt for the low density structure hooked up to the dynamic LTN loading warehouse here. Okay then, time to fire this thing up and see what happens to our electrical network. So this thing should basically suck up an entire purple belt worth of plastic for the most part. We might need to make this red in the middle, because it's right on the limit of a purple belt. But so too is the aluminum, so it's all pretty close. It's a lot of manufacturing, and we get our free structure before even the regular structure comes out. And there they are. Hopefully every one of these is set to the correct side. I guess we'll find out when there's some structures that are on the wrong side. But so far so good. Pollution is... Wow. I think that's a new record for how much pollution is in such a tiny area. That it really seems like actually this part of the factory is probably by far the biggest polluter. So if we're going to have some active pollution reduction going on, it should probably be in this area. But still going. The plastic hasn't made it to the bottom yet. But our structure is being produced now. Oh my goodness, 2,000 pollution. Alright, well, I think we should design something that consumes pollution. So, out of all of the machines that we could use, we can do farms, which, even with these farming modules, does negative 132 pollution. Of course, there's fish tanks and puffer nests and stuff, which do consume a decent amount of pollution, but it's a lot harder to do those and figure out what we want to do with the output compared to just farming something. The other thing that we can do are some of these air filters, and they're like -42, which isn't very dense, so it seems like a farm would be the best idea. And if this setup produces 182 pollution a second, then that's about what we'd need to consume, which really, when you think about it, isn't much, considering all of that can be removed by just a couple of farms. So, alright, it's building up. It's got a huge buffer to go through to actually give all these machines their necessary plastic, but it's getting there. That is a lot of low-density structure. So I am happy with this so far. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, we are going to try to counter the massive amount of pollution that this setup makes with a bunch of tree farms. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.